Hey guys, this is Eggy, and in this video I am going over the introduction to integers. We will be going over practice problems dealing with absolute value, positive and negative integers, graphing on the number line, and inequality symbols. In this video we will go over how to differentiate greater than or less than, and if you have a specific math problem you would like to see, feel free to leave a comment or email me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's get started. So when we start to think about numbers, we think about natural numbers. Natural numbers would be anywhere from 1, 2, 3 and above. And then we also think about whole numbers like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But when we think about integers actually have to deal with numbers that are below 0. Think of 0 as your starting point. Now I'm just going to write down some of the whole and natural numbers that we naturally think of when we think about math, or when we go ahead in our everyday life and look at how much is something, what's the price of something, how much do I have in my checking account. We rarely think about negative numbers that are below 0. So an example of obviously the whole number, it would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and above. But when we think about integers are actually numbers that can be positive or negative depending on where they are on the number line. Now, integers, like I stated, when we think about negative number, we think about a number that's below 0. Now let me just draw this number line so we can visually see it. Now remember, 0 is always our starting point. And to the right we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And to the left we have negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you know the difference? Pause the video if you want to draw the number line so that you can follow. All these numbers are considered integers. Now, when we talk about negative or positive, for example, to the right of 0, these numbers are positive. The numbers to the left of 0 are negative. What if your professor asked, which number is bigger, negative or positive? Well, think about your checking account or your piggy bank. You usually want a positive number, right? You want your piggy bank to have $100, not negative $100. So let's say I wanted you to show me on the graph, show me on the number line, -2 and -5. How would you show me that on your number line? Well, let's write that down first. Let's draw the number line. And remember, 0 is always our starting point, because that's how we're able to know exactly if we're going to the left or are we going to the right. Now, I know that I'm dealing with a negative number and I'm dealing with a positive number. Usually a number that doesn't have any symbol, we can assume that it's positive. Now, let me go ahead and show you what I mean when I say negative. Negative numbers are usually below 0. Smaller than 0. They're usually on the left side. So -2 is on the left and +5 is on the right. Think about it if someone were to ask you, do you want -$2 or do you want $5? Automatically you would think that you want 5. You don't want to be below 0. You don't want to owe money. So always think about the numbers that are on the right side of 0 as the bigger number. The positive numbers are usually bigger than the negative numbers. they're on the right side. And the left side, usually the numbers are negative. They're smaller than 0. Anytime you hear smaller, greater, less than, bigger than, we're usually comparing two numbers. And in this case, we're comparing -2 and 5. -2 is less than 5. We usually read problems left to right. Just how you would read a regular book, you read math problems from left to right. I'm going to teach you what this inequality symbol, this little symbol that's between the -2 and 5, what it really means, and how you can definitely go ahead and differentiate. What are you reading? How would you know? Pause the video and copy some of the number lines here. So here you have two symbols. They look like little sharks. They look like little mouths. Or they look like Pac-Man. I'm sure most of you guys know what Pac-Man is. Pac-Man is that little creature, I guess, if you want to call it a creature. It's a Pac-Man. He usually is eating the pearls, the dots. You never see him going towards an empty space. You see him going towards the pearls. Well, think of the symbols like that. The inequality symbols usually want to face, the mouth part wants to face the bigger number. So let's say the shark or the Pac-Man, the mouth part is usually facing the bigger number, and the pointy part, the little edge part, is usually facing the smaller number. So we would read the actual inequality problem from left to right. Now let me show you on the number line how this visually looks. Let's say your professor wanted you to compare -7 and 4. How would you show that on the number line? Well, we know -7 is less than 4. What about -10 and 1? Which number is bigger? Well, the mouth part is going to face number 1. So -10 is less than 1. What about -4 and -1? Well, they're both on the left side of the 0, but which one is bigger? Well, -1 is bigger because -1 is closer to 0. Remember, as you go to the right side on the number line, the number becomes bigger. What about -2 and -6? Which one is bigger? -2. -2 is closer to 0. Remember, -6 is further down the line, further to the left, so it's a lesser than number. We would read it as -2 is greater than -6. We would read it as -4 is less than -1. -10 is less than 1. -7 is less than 4. Now remember, the pointy part of the actual symbol, the inequality symbol, will always face the smaller number. And the mouth part, the open part, is always going to face the bigger number. So depending on how the symbol or where the actual mouth is facing, that's how you would read the problem. It takes a little bit of practice, but once you remember that the mouth part, the open part, faces the bigger number, you will just automatically place the open part, the mouth part, facing the bigger number. Remember, it's either less than or greater than. You read the problem from left to right. It doesn't matter how you place the actual inequality symbol, as long as you know the pointy part is always facing the smaller number and the open part is facing the bigger number. Think of it like Pac-Man. Pac-Man always wants to eat. I'm going to actually put that here so you guys remember. Pac-Man always wants to eat the bigger number. We always want the bigger number, the bigger slice of pizza, the bigger slice of cake, the let's say like the bigger amount of money. Always think of it like that. And as you go to the right side on the number line, the numbers get bigger. If you go to the left side, then the numbers get smaller. So let's work on a few problems here where we're comparing two numbers and looking at the inequalities using the inequality symbol. Let's compare -2 and -5. Remember the number line. What's closer to 0? -2 is. So -2 is the bigger number. What about -2 and 5? What's the bigger number here? 5 is. So the mouth is always facing the bigger number. Pac-Man wants to eat the bigger number. What about -5 and 2? 2 is the bigger number because remember, 2 is positive. Now let's compare, let's see here. Let's say 2 and 5. What's the bigger number here? 5, of course. Remember, positive numbers are always bigger than negative numbers. When you're comparing two negative numbers, which one is closer to 0? That would be the bigger number. The pointy part of the inequality symbol is always facing the smaller number. What about 11 and 12? That's easy. $12 is obviously more than $11. What about -11 and 12? 12 is the bigger number. What about -11 and -12? -11 is greater than -12. What about -12 and 11? How would you read that? -12 is less than 11. Remember, we read the problems from left to right. Anytime you're just plugging in the symbol, remember the symbol is going to be the pointy part, the end part is facing the smaller number, and the mouth part, the open part, is always facing the bigger number. Remember, Pac-Man wants to eat the bigger number. When you're comparing a negative number and a positive number, the positive number is always the bigger number. When you're comparing two negatives, which one is closer to 0? The number closer to 0 is the bigger number. Let's try to look at this visually on the number line. Let's see. Remember, we're always starting with the number 0. That's our starting point. And on the right side is our positive numbers, and on the on the left side, it's always our negative numbers. Now, let me show you visually how this looks on the number line. Remember, when we're comparing numbers, you can always use 0 as your starting point. Even if this takes a few times for you to practice, don't worry. This is going to become second nature to you guys, and you'll be able to plug in inequality symbols quicker, faster than you can actually notice what's going on. Now, let me choose a couple of other numbers here to practice on. Remember, the left side of the 0 is the negative. The right side of 0 is positive. Let's compare two numbers. Let's compare -4 and 4. Where exactly would that be on the number line? Well, we know -4 is on the left side of 0. And -4 is less than 4. Remember, you're reading the problem from left to right. Now let's just plug in, and let me show you on the number line here where this is. The left side of 0 is negative numbers, negative integers. Let me change the screen here because I would like for you guys to see visually how this looks. Okay, so as we see on the number line, the right side of 0, the numbers are positive and they're getting bigger. The numbers on the left side on the number line are negative and are getting smaller. Pause the video and copy this number line so that you can visually see that when you're dealing with negative and positive integers, how you would automatically know, is the number positive, is the number negative, and is the number getting bigger, or is the number getting smaller? That way, when you're comparing two numbers and dealing with the inequality symbol, if you ever get stuck, you can just draw out the number line and see where your two numbers land. Is the number on the left side of 0 or is the number on the right side of 0? Visually see this, and I'm sure that you will get inequality problems very quickly. Let's work on another problem here. Now, let's say we are dealing with the opposite numbers. Now, why the opposite numbers are important is because when you're dealing with a whole number or a natural number, you want to know if you're dealing with a positive or a negative number. So for instance, let's say you were dealing with the number negative 23. What's the opposite of 23? Negative 23. The opposite of positive is negative. The opposite of negative is positive. So I'm just writing a couple of numbers down so that you can visually see. 160, the opposite is negative 160. The opposite of 31 is negative 31. And the opposite number of negative 4 is 4. Now let's look at another topic, the absolute value. I'm sure some of you have seen this in math class already. Now, it's important to know that the absolute value is usually positive. But there is an exception that you have to be careful. Now, let me give you some problems here to practice. Let's say you had the absolute value of 83. The absolute value of 83 is 83. What about the absolute value of negative 5? It's 5. What about the absolute value of 11? 11. What about the absolute value of negative 45? It is 45. Now let me show you. The absolute value is usually positive, always positive. But there is one exception that I do want you to be very careful when you're dealing with problems that have to do with absolute value. Now, let's say, for instance, you had negative 5 and 10. What's the bigger number? 10 is the bigger number. What about the absolute value of negative 5 and 10? Well, we know the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Remember, absolute values are usually positive. So what's the bigger number, 5 or 10? 10. So 5 is less than 10. The open mouth is facing the number 10. Remember, Pac-Man always wants to eat the bigger number. When you're dealing with the absolute value, remember, you're going to see these two symbols surrounding the number. But, like I said, there's an exception that the number will not be positive. And remember, you usually don't have to write the positive symbol when it has to deal with any positive number. If there isn't a symbol, we assume that it's positive. Let's compare more numbers here as far as inequality goes. The absolute value of 10 is 10. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. But what if I wanted you to compare the two? What's bigger? Well, we know the absolute value of negative 10 is 10, and 10 is 10. So they're equal to each other. There isn't an inequality. What if I said I wanted you to compare the absolute value to 43 to negative 52? Well, we know the absolute value of negative 52 is 52. So it's 43 less than 52. What about the absolute value of 100 and the absolute value of 1? Well, 100 would be bigger than 1. What if about the absolute value of negative 28 and 43? Well, we know 43 would be the bigger one. So it's negative. It would be the absolute value of negative 28, which is 28, is less than the absolute value of 43, which is 43. What about negative 5, 6? Let's see. Negative absolute value of negative 8 and negative 20. Let's put these in order from smallest to biggest, least to greatest. Well, what does this mean? The negative is outside of the absolute value. Well, we know that the absolute value of negative 8 is 8, but there's a negative symbol this time. So there's an exception here. The negative symbol means that the number, regardless of what it is, if it's positive or negative, is still negative. So the absolute value is negative 8. Anytime that you see two symbols like this, like two negatives, you can assume that the number is going to be negative. Let's say when we're multiplying a negative and a negative, that's a positive. What about when we're applying a negative and a positive? That's a negative. But we are actually going to go into more details in another video. But just know that if you see a negative symbol outside of the absolute value, that means that the number is negative. So let's put this in order. What's the absolute value of negative 5? It's 5. We have 6, we have negative 8, and we have negative 20. Let's put this from smallest to biggest, meaning least to greatest. What's the smallest number we have here? Well, we know that negative 20 is going to be the furthest on the number line. Remember, 0 is our starting point. So that means that negative 20 is further on the left side of the number line. So it would be negative 20, negative 8, 5, and then 6. All right, guys, let's go over what we've learned. In summary, the inequality symbols. The pointy side of the inequality symbol is always facing the smallest number, or the open side, the mouth part. He's always trying to eat the bigger number, so the open side is always facing the biggest number. I want you to think of Pac-Man as one of the tricks here when you're dealing with inequality or you're comparing two numbers. Remember, the absolute value is always positive. The only exception is when you see a negative symbol outside of the absolute value, like we saw here, negative absolute value of the negative 8. It's negative 8. When you're looking at the number line, start with 0. Is the number on the left or the right side? If it's on the right side, that means it's going to be bigger and it's positive. If you see the number on the left side, it's smaller and it's negative. When you're dealing with comparing, remember you're reading the problem from left to right. I do hope that you guys enjoyed this video. And in summary, if you ever get stuck, draw the number line. Start with the number 0. If you're comparing two numbers, draw a dot on the actual number. Is the number starting on the left of 0, or is the number on the right of 0? If the numbers are on the right of 0, they're positive. And the further you go to the right on the number line, the bigger the number. If the number is on the left side of 0, that means that the number is negative. And the further you go to the left side on the number line, the number is getting smaller. If at any point you have two negative numbers, you still draw the number line, you see that the numbers are on the left side of 0, and you see, is the number closer to 0, or is it going further down the number line on the left? Remember when we compared negative 4 and negative 3? Negative 3 was the bigger number. I do hope that you enjoyed this video introduction to integers. I will be adding on more introduction videos to algebra, pre-calculus, and calculus. Remember, if you have a math problem, feel free to always email me or leave a comment below. If there's a specific math problem you would like to see or a topic, always feel free to comment and I'll be more than happy to make a video about it. Again, feel free to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and I hope you guys have a good one.